Hi gang, welcome to another video. I hope you're all doing well today. So this is Watercolor Portrait Demo time-lapse that I made from the weekend. All materials will be listed on the description box, so feel free to check it out. I did this painting for about an hour-ish and I used watercolor for the painting. I did the sketch with a red Prismacolor pencil first. I do this to make sure that I get all the proportions right before I go in again later on with a darker pencil. When I sketch straight on watercolor paper, I do tend to be a bit more careful while making my marks to avoid messiness or sloppy pencil strokes. I use a kneaded eraser so that I don't accidentally ruin the sizing of the paper. Usually I use a Daiso eraser, but for this one painting I don't, which can happen if you erase too much with a firmer eraser, but it also depends on the paper that you're using. For this one, it's an Arches hot press, and I find that Arches hot press paper is more durable compared to some of the other hot press papers that I've used so far, like for example Canson Heritage. Now let's talk about the painting process. I use mainly this one brush. It's a synthetic number 5 or 6 round brush from Rubens, and I do like synthetic brush more than natural hair brush because sometimes natural hair brush is a bit too soft and holds too much water that it's easier to get water plumes or water marks when you use this type of brush. Synthetic brush is a bit more firm and it's easier to control, especially for creating portraits. I like to start with the shading first. Sometimes I reverse this process by applying an undertone or an underpainting with one color, usually warm tone color or burnt sienna, but for today's painting I'm doing the shading first using a mix of ochre and iso-indolent yellow. You can use burnt sienna mixed with warm yellow or any warm yellow mixed with a little bit of warm red. If you can see here, when I put paint on paper, I smoothen the corner out immediately to avoid any harsh edges, which is something that I like to avoid in portraits. When doing this smoothing out process, don't forget to clean your brush first and then make sure that it's not holding any water and it's damp, not bone dry, so they can smoothen out the edges properly. Make sure that you're being gentle and not too harsh here if you're using synthetic brush, since it can break the paper if you're not careful. After you apply the first layer, and this applies for every layers that you're doing, make sure that it's properly dry before you apply another layer of paints. And also another tips, and this is really just how I paint. It might differ with how other people do it, but I like to build up the layers with thin or small amount of pigments instead of just applying a really bold, thick layer, because watercolor do have a color shift when it's wet and when it's dry. It tends to go a little bit lighter when it's dry, so that's something that needs to be considered when you're applying paints. Now, some tips about doing portraits with watercolor. 1. Get the right paper. Even if it's not 100% cotton, make sure that it's at least 200 or 300 GSM. I think that the paper matters more than the paint. Student grade paints have the potential to be good when used on a better quality paper. When you're using watercolor on a paper that's not meant for watercolor, not only that you're going to see some buckling, but the colors won't be showcased properly either. The one example I can think of right now is that paint can look very dull on papers that are not meant for watercolor. Tips number 2. Don't use granulating watercolor. You guys know I absolutely love granulation, but not when I'm doing portraits. And definitely not on the face area. There are some pigments that you need to avoid. Like for example, with the earth tones pigments like burnt sienna, burnt umber, and raw sienna. I know that I mentioned that you can mix burnt sienna for skin color earlier, but just be a bit more careful about it. Tips number 3. Get your sketch done correctly first. The sketch is obviously the base of the artwork, it's the foundation of the artwork. If you're not really happy with the proportion during this stage, if you're not really happy with the foundation during this stage, it's easier to scrap or fix it early on instead of spending all of your time and energy painting on a sketch that you weren't too happy to begin with. And lastly, practice. Yes, the tried advice, but it works. Maybe the first time drawings won't be good when you're only getting started, but no one's born good at anything. A skill is something that you need to keep working on, and you need to sharpen it constantly. And you gotta have fun during the process of it, because drawing is fun, Painting is fun. This activity should be a fun process for you. Now, don't think too much about it. Pick up your pencil and just start. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do have the full-length, real-time version of this painting on my Patreon. If you would like to see it and would like to support me, that would be super cool. If you sign up as my patron, you will get full library access. Yes, even the contents from previous months. Alright, see you when I see you. Bye.